What's up? It's Gareth, and welcome to the Ignite Your Business Weekly live stream. Today, we are talking podcasts. Podcasting is exploding at the moment. It's a format that came out in the early 2000s, and it's continued to grow as a medium for people to be able to create essentially what is the old traditional version of a radio show using digital technology. And for brand owners and businesses and solopreneurs, using this digital technology, they have the ability to really create their own radio show. And doing that gives them the ability to be able to have potentially long format conversations or tell a specific story around a niche topic that they can use to promote their brands or create awareness for their potential products or offerings to their potential clients. So what we thought we would do is unpack exactly what's required to starting a podcast. And what we decided to do was bring on two friends of mine, Craig Haywood and Gareth Martin. They call themselves two brothers from other mothers, and they are the co-hosts of the Ridiculously Human podcast. They started their podcast in the end of 2017. They have a weekly format where they have an interview style podcast talking to people with interesting stories to tell, and we thought we would bring them on to talk about what they've learned, having gone through over 150 episodes now. So I can welcome Gareth Martin in South Africa and Craig Haywood. What's up, boys? What's up, boys?
How's it going,
brother?
Gareth? That's a flippin' cool intro, brother. Love it, man. Well done.
Well done. That was epic. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, dudes. It was it's good to have be in the driving seat. It was probably like your sixth show that I was also in Guatemala in a different location, and I was guest number 6 on the Ridiculously Human podcast. But the time zones with Craig being in Australia were pretty similar, with you having to work sort of was it 9 p.m. there now?
Yeah.
And just after 5 a.m. in Guatemala. So thanks for getting on and chatting to us, boys.
Yeah, pleasure.
Yes, man, we're super excited. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah,
nice one.
And this is the joy of doing podcasts around the world, but like as these early mornings and late nights. Like Craig actually had to wake up at 4 a.m. this morning to record another podcast. So he's got the worst of both shifts this today. So
hey, but it's only one day's work though. It's all in a day's work. So
yeah, it's crazy.
Brilliant.
Awesome, boys. Thank you so much for joining us. And maybe one of you want to just give an intro about what the Ridiculously Human podcast about is. Like, what's your format? Just an intro about why you guys decided to start a podcast, and just introduce the Ridiculously Human show.
Sure. We are two brothers from other mothers, as you said, and the main thing we have is a massive curiosity for people's stories, and we are just constantly enamored with how much we learn from when we listen to other people. And we've always had this curiosity and this drive to know more. And we realized, back in the day before we started the podcast in a pub in Madrid, we were like, these conversations that we have, we're always just so enlightened at the end of it. And we realized, podcasting is coming along, and we should just be recording these shows, shouldn't we? Should we and create a show from these conversations we're having. And I think that kind of was the spark that got us going. And we're just so lucky with this format that we're able to sit down and pick someone's brain for any length of time and just be totally inspired by their story. And it's a new way of connecting. I think Gareth would totally agree with me that it's been a super rewarding experience. Hey.
Yeah, 100%, Craig. And like, you know what, it's a constant learning experience for us as well. And the more we do it, the more we realize how much we have to learn from other people. Like literally every single person in this world, without even knowing it, has an amazing story that is inspiring to somebody else. And that's just like what really keeps us going. Each week we speak to these people and we're like, wow, we learn so much, you know what I mean? So it's just something that keeps on evolving and something that we keep on learning from. And Flip, I wouldn't know where my life would be without having a podcast these days.
Craig would be in bed already. We know that.
That's for sure.
But a slightly less happy version of me that would be in bed early, you know.
So, boys, what we discussed off air in our preparation for this call was to sort of go through a structure which we could share with the Ignite audience around some of the steps that you guys have been through in your journey of setting up a podcast. While the technology is available and it's easy to do, there's a couple of things that need to be considered before just turning on the microphone and starting to record. So what we decided to do was share with our audience the 7 steps to start with a podcast, to get started with your own podcast. And so what I'll do is I'll just put this question out to you guys and let you free flow with your answers as we go through these 7 steps, and at the end give you the space to be able to share anything that I might have missed in my questions on the sharing of your journey of what you've been through to be able to bring 155 episodes of the Ridiculously Human Show to the world. So the first question is, why would somebody want to start a podcast? What's the idea behind it? What have you've touched a little bit on your journey as to the why, but what are some of the other reasons why someone may want to actually start a podcast?
Yeah, cool, man. I don't mind just sort of kicking that one off, but also just want to kind of also just pre-frame for things for us, Gareth. Like, you know, there is so much information out there, you know, and like we could spend hours talking about each one of these steps because there is so much to consider, but we'll just be as succinct as possible and give you kind of the sort of top things, you know, that we've kind of learned and that will help other people just get things off the ground, you know. So whatever we say, if there's more questions, then we're more than welcome, you know, happy to answer anything that sort of comes off the back of this show. So why I think people would want to start a podcast, like, you know, there's tons of reasons, but one of them, I suppose, is kind of positioning yourself as an expert in your field. So, you know, all of us are, or, you know, we're in a specific industry, and it's one way of getting our kind of name out there, you know, is sort of speaking about the topic that we're in, the industry that we're in, to kind of maybe experts that are in that industry too. So you then position yourself as this expert that people recognize and you know, want to know more of. So it really helps your business and your brand in that regard. And then also I think it builds up that trust too, you know. And I think in this day and age, with everything that's going on in the world, trust is such a key thing, which is really going to help you grow your business, you know, and get people to believe in you and things. So that's just a couple of reasons I think on my side. Craigos, I'm sure you've got a million yourself.
Yeah, thanks, Gareth. I think that's very, very true. And I think one of the coolest things that we've learned along this journey is when you do something, you learn something. So by taking action and starting something, guaranteed you will learn. There's a lot of collateral that comes along with that. So along that journey, you suddenly go, okay, shit, we have to do some marketing material. Like, how do we do that? How do we make an audiogram? What is headline? You know, all these little things that crop up along the journey, and scheduling, and you know, your bio, and all these weird things that you wouldn't necessarily know about beforehand. And a podcast is just one way of learning to speak and to slow down and to be slightly more succinct with your language. And it's a sort of a fun way of forcing yourself to do so. And it might be sort of a slightly less of the nuts and bolts thing as you'd expect from starting, or like your why. But one of the reasons that have really helped Gareth and I are our listening skills and our language skills in doing this. And I think it's probably quite an important thing in life to practice these kinds of skills. So there's just one extra that I think has really been beneficial in our life and our journey with the podcast.
Nice one. So yeah, what I heard you say there was really this idea of being able to position yourself as an expert in your field, and through interviewing other people, you're essentially building your own personal brand. And then along the way, you get the additional benefit of, you know, improving your conversation skills and bringing some work and almost a piece of art into the world as you go through it. So once you've got that why, the reason you want to start the podcast, where do you move to with regards to identifying who? So second step would be, who are you talking to? Like, how important is it, and what's the process that you go through for identifying who the potential audience is for? Because I guess, like most businesses, you sort of get to this idea of trying to niche down to a specific place, you know? So when you start a business selling widgets, you want to know exactly who's going to buy these. is that an important process in developing a podcast, as to identifying who your listener is?
Yeah,
sure. It certainly is. Sure, man. Yeah, it really is important. I think there's a few things, like first of all, it's audio. And if you predominantly audio, you need to consider that is your niche or your industry something where people are seeking an audio format and are willing to spend the time and the energy to listen to something in this format. So that's, I think more and more that's becoming the case, but it certainly wasn't always the case. So that's definitely something to consider. And then obviously, like you said, in any industry, the niche is vitally important because the slices are becoming ever more thin between industries now, and the number of podcasts are going up at a very sharp rate. So I think sometimes the idea of niching down to a very specific point is going to always be super beneficial in terms of the people that you are finding you, and also the sort of connection that they find with you and your voice on the show. And what would you say, Gareth? What else would you add there?
Yeah, look, just in terms of like how we found ours, Gareth, what we did is we basically, we did this course. There's so many courses you can do. You can subscribe to so many free courses. The one we did was with a guy called John Lee Dumas, who runs like one of the most successful podcasts called Entrepreneurs on Fire. And he sends you out like a weekly, or I think it was 11 days in a row. He sent you like things to do to start a podcast. And one of those was identifying your avatar, right? And what you do is there was then like a set of about like 7 or 10 questions or something, just kind of understanding who that person is exactly. And I think it's really important to identify what your avatar is, who they are, like the age, when they listen to your podcast, etc. Is it a man? Is it a woman? Is it both? Because like Craig says, in this day and age, we have to actually find that niche in terms of who we're speaking to, because it changes how we speak to them as well. And it also makes it easier for us to find them and for them to find us as well. So that's a really important thing. But it's flipping difficult, right? So like this is something Craig and I, is probably one of the biggest things that we talk about, is about who are we speaking to, and the one thing, which we've constantly done is always kept our dialogue open. And we always we go, cool, well, let's refine who this person is. Let's talk about this more and more and more. And it's always like a kind of a bit of a back and forth, in terms of, just figuring out who this person is that we're trying to speak to, so we've just actually redone it again at the start of this year. Like, who is this person? What do they look like? Because what you're going to do is when you start your podcast is you're going to start figuring things out, and more things are going to become apparent. So you're going to probably have to kind of take a few turns, back and forth and whatever. And that then helps you kind of redefine things and niche things up a bit more.
And there's one thing I'd add there. Sorry, carry on.
Go with it, brother.
No, I was just going to say, obviously, if it links strongly to your why, if your work is a very niche thing, like you're a dungeon master and Dungeons and Dragons, person or whatever, unless it's quite a niche thing, like then it suddenly becomes a little bit easier for you to just go, like, I know exactly what my niche is, but it's important to identify still what that person looks like. So as Gareth mentioned, the language you're using to them is still going to be specific. It's not just what is the name of the podcast or what is the genre. It can be a lot more specific. So yeah, good point.
So just to give your guys the opportunity to, if you're open to sharing your avatar, what is your ideal listener of the Ridiculously Human show look like? What type of person is that? If you've identified at the beginning of this year, is it something that you're willing to share?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's I'm probably going to muddle it up with the original one, but it's generally kind of, I guess, the same person, but maybe a bit more defined. So like we're talking to men and women. We kind of, that was also a key thing. Like, is it men and women? We decided, I think in the end, okay, it's actually for both, not just for one, that are probably in their 30s, late 30s and 40s. Okay, that are they're on this path of they're seeking, right? They're seeking something else. You know what I mean? Like, there's got to be kind of more to this world. So they're basically on this path of personal growth, personal development, and they're quite curious about whatever's out there and are open to ideas. So I'd say that, Craigos, is there a bit more to add to that, do you think?
No, I think it's well said, man. So well done. and it's like, it is that's kind of what led me to say what I said earlier, is like our podcast is slightly more broad in nature. It's like seeking more, like wanting to explore each other and connections and these kinds of things more. So in our specific case, it's like a very specific kind of person that is looking for more, has a lot of kindness in their heart, is willing to listen, and all those kind of things that Gareth mentioned. But at the same time, it can be quite a broad sounding idea because it connects with all of us. So we're trying to find the connection and the niche within an umbrella that seems quite broad, and that's kind of been our challenge, and continues to be refined, as Gareth said as well.
Nice one. Thanks, boys. So that's the second step, the who, and deciding who it is that you're going to speak to. And what I heard you guys say there is it's really important to see, before you start, who it is that you're trying to speak to, so that you can tailor your languaging in the right way to create an audio format that's useful for them. So the next step would be the format. How do you decide what you're going to be doing? I've heard some podcasts that are sort of storytelling, narrative. You guys have an interview style. You go audio and video. Like, how do you come up with those ideas, and what are some of the considerations with regards to format, and perhaps touch on the duration of the format? Like, are you going to keep it to a specific duration? I've seen some podcasts that are like, I've got a guy's got like, 1 minute podcast every couple of days, and then there's, guys doing really long format. So just, if you could unpack what you went through to decide format and where you've ended up.
Okay, cool. So basically, originally, I think our one, we settled on long form, basically because that's what we enjoyed, right? So I think that's an important thing to also consider whenever you're doing something in life. You also need to enjoy it, I guess, at the end of the day. And that was one of the reasons we both have always listened to long form podcasts, and we, different people though, like we both listen to different guys and girls. And so that was a thing we had in common. We're like, oh, cool. And also to what we found, I was obviously interview based and we speak to guests each week, but like to get that layer deeper, sometimes you need that extra time, right? Because people only generally, and it's so weird, Gareth, like we've found this, and I'm not joking, in probably 99% of our chats, is that after 1 hour, and literally it happens on the hour, people seem to open up. I promise you, the conversation shifts and it changes. And I don't know if it's just they become more comfortable or whatever it is, but after an hour, people just open up, and we find that we get to go into that more juicy stuff, a little bit later on in the podcasts. So for us, while we did that, like I said, it was just our preference, really, and we thought, we just thought we would go with that. But there's, I mean, you can, there's, and one thing I would like to just say, I don't think there's a preferred time as well, because we went to podcast conference a couple of years ago in the States. And one of the talks and stats that they gave us was on the length of podcasts, because there's people going, no, you should be like 20 minutes, because that's enough. People can only concentrate for 20 minutes, whatever. But then the actual stats were like, no, it doesn't actually matter what the length of your podcast is. If you have good content and that good content only lasts for 20 minutes, then just go for 20 minutes. If you have good content and it goes for like 4 hours, then go for the 4 hours, because your people will find you if you've sort of defined your avatar nicely enough, So it really depends, on the sort of type of podcast you have, you know what I mean? Like we find that interview ones for us we enjoy longer form, but if you are like a person who's trying to maybe build up your personal brand, maybe that short 5, 10, 15-minute one is good enough. Or if you're trying to grow your business, maybe once again, that's also shorter format is better. So, I mean, there's so many things to consider when it comes to time and length and sort of frequency and these sort of things as well. So, Craigos, I don't know if you've got anything else to add to that.
Yeah, man, that was well said. I think another layer there is also to consider the type of work that it will take. So when you are interviewing someone, there is some freedom in the fact that you can just ask people questions. They're adding a lot of meat to your 20 minutes or 40 minutes because you're just asking them. They're essentially creating the content for you in some ways. There is then the scheduling and the back and forths and the storyboards and these kind of things that add another layer of certain type of work. So if that's maybe in terms of your flow of work and stuff is difficult, then that's something to consider. On the other hand, if it's just you, you have to just be talking yourself and keep it relevant and not waste your listeners' time. And it's sometimes a challenge maybe because you're not just, you have to keep it on topic and there's so many shows out there now that where one just rambles a little bit about themselves that you have to be careful of that. So I think each one has got its pro and con. And I think once again, it comes back to like exactly the first few steps. That's why it's well set out the way of question these things, Gareth, is like, where is it flowing in the right way to fit with who you're trying to speak to? And I think that's maybe just the one thing I'd add there.
Awesome. So so the takeaway for me on that point was the format and duration is less important than the nature of the content that goes in and how direct it is for the avatar, the person that you're speaking to in the niche that you're trying to target. So cool.
Yeah.
I guess the next question is going to flow on from there, and it probably may not need too much unpacking if it's going to be similar to format, but frequency, I guess. Some people are putting out, John D. Loomis that you mentioned earlier is doing a daily podcast. Every weekday he puts out a podcast. You guys are going weekly. How important is the frequency of the podcasts to the audience? And maybe as an input as well, what is the additional maybe work required to having a higher frequency podcast and stuff like that? Maybe something you can speak to with regards to how often is standard. I know you guys maybe got similar information around frequency, like is it going to be a weekly podcast or something from podcast world? I don't know if you guys want to unpack the frequency of podcasts.
Yeah, man. I think that a lot goes into that as well. We found ourselves not too long ago at a place where we were a little bit we'd run ourselves a little bit ragged, let's say, because we had put that pressure of a weekly podcast, 1 week, every week, a full length podcast. And a lot goes into that, and we make sure we put that effort in to do that. And we've just recently sort of changed the format a little bit so that we have a weekly podcast, but the format is slightly different 1 week and then the following week and then back to the same format. So we've then also been sort of playing with this idea to be able to keep the consistency and the quality of the work that you're putting out. One has to then look at capacity and how much you can actually do and that kind of thing. And there's one other thing to consider there as well, is like, I listened to Philosophize This, which is an amazing podcast, and he puts out such a great podcast. I'm really excited to hear his next episode, Stephen West. But the weird thing is that sometimes it'll be like a month and 3 weeks, 1 week, and you forgive him because it's that good. Not everyone will be as good as that, and maybe that's when the frequency and the consistency becomes more important. And the other thing is, when you look back at a list of someone's podcast, a lot of people will only come in when you 100 episodes in perhaps, and then they've got this whole list to go back and listen to. So the frequency in that perspective doesn't become massively important unless someone's been following your journey and then jump on board, and then from then on it becomes more important. So these are just little things to, not necessarily an answer to the question, but maybe things just to consider on maybe coming back to that quality over quantity is also something to really consider in the situation. Hey, Gareth.
Yeah, for sure. And like Craig, I think the most important thing is actually the consistency in my mind, if you are thinking about frequency. So, do it once a week, or do it once every 2 weeks, or once a month, or whatever. Like if you are thinking about trying to keep it, have some sort of frequency, just make it consistent so that the people listening, they know, okay, cool. The first Monday of every month, I'm going to be getting a new podcast sort of thing. So they'll look out for it. And the thing about podcast listeners is they tie you into their days, right? Like, so, they'll listen to you. They'll go, cool, I know I've got the gym today. I'm going to be listening to these guys' podcast because it comes out this morning, and they might listen to 10 podcasts and they'll be like, cool, well, tomorrow I'm driving home, I've got my 30-minute podcast that I listen to. So it's just important to have that consistency so people know. And the other thing, which people must never underestimate, and I was going to save this kind of till the end, but we can just briefly touch on it now, is like not to underestimate the amount of work, right, that goes into producing a podcast, because that will then help you decide at least the frequency as well. So there's a tremendous amount of work that goes into producing a podcast, both before, during, and after the podcast. The editing and the marketing and all these sort of things. So there's quite a lot to consider. And if it's just you, like for Craig and I, it's basically 90% of the time it's just us. We have a couple of virtual assistants that help us with a few things, but the majority and the bulk of the work is done by us. So it is an overload, and like you said, last year we were actually doing 2 a week. Remember, Craigos, we were doing 2 podcasts a week, and that became too much for us. And we were like, no, we've got to, for our own longevity and own enjoyment, we've got to sort of change this back to 1 podcast a week, just so that we can keep on going and keep the passion alive, basically.
It's like the journey of an entrepreneur. You don't know this stuff until you start it. On day one, you're like, let's do a weekly podcast. And suddenly you're like, shit, this is a lot of work that you didn't realize. And so you end up in this place where you overwork. I will just add another episode. But yeah, that's interesting. Thank you for unpacking that. I got from that the frequency is really a function of again, the content that you've got and your ability to be able to deliver something at sort of an agreed promise to your potential listener, based on your ability to fit this in. Because I guess we'll get to it at the end. I wanted to speak specifically about money, but I guess for most people starting a podcast, this is not their thing that brings in all their money, specifically when you're first starting out. I know everyone will look at Joe Rogan and be like, the guy makes $1 million a podcast, but he didn't start like that. And for most solo entrepreneurs, you're probably going to have to fit this in around the 9 to 5 and the kids and all the other things that you're doing. So yeah, so I heard you said the work to put in before a podcast and preparing for it, obviously the time you spend like this in conversation and in the post-production is an important thing to consider.
Totally, bud.
Massive. Yeah,
cool. So I want to get a little bit more technical now with some of the stuff already pre-framed in terms of some of the almost like strategy and preparation of what you might think about when you deciding to put together a podcast. Like, what are some of the things that you need to consider with regards to hardware? I see you boys have both got the smart microphones that stand up close to your mouth. I've got these beats for. So talk us through the hardware. Like, how expensive is it to get set up with a podcast? Can you literally do it from your phone? Are there different entry points for hardware? And what do you guys use and suggest based on your experience after 150 episodes?
Yeah, so I don't mind taking that one there and just starting off there, Craig. So I mean, look, there's extremes. You know what I mean? You can literally do it without getting any equipment if you want to. Actually, in terms of recording the audio, your phone like literally actually can record audio quality like it's like a microphone almost. No jokes, right? So for our podcast, we actually get the guests to record their audio on their phones if they don't have like a microphone or anything like that. So it's totally possible, you know what I mean, to literally, especially if you're just a one-man band and you're doing your own podcast, all you need is your phone, and you literally, if you want, you can just, and you're looking at me, I'm holding my phone up like upside down talking into the microphone. That's literally all you kind of need, you know what I mean, in one regards, but I would say the things that are that and I'm sure Craig and I agree on this, the things that I would definitely spend money on is I would definitely get a good microphone, and it doesn't break the bank, to be honest with you. These ones that we're using, they're called ATR 2100s, made by Audio Technica, and they're like, in the US, if you're buying it, it's like $60 or something like that. So it's not going to break the bank, and that really does make a massive difference to the quality of the show. Like, we got to remember, this is an audio show, so like, get yourself a good microphone for sure. And yeah, I mean, that's the main thing I would think of for hardware, you know what I mean? Like, but obviously, I think there's things that maybe we just take for granted that you need, like, a laptop you can do. I've been traveling for 7 months, and I've been just recording podcasts on the go. I have a MacBook, a laptop. I have my Logitech HD camera, like a webcam. And I think that's really important, especially if you are doing a video version of the podcast as well, which is what we do. And then the only other thing that I have, which is like an add-on that you don't necessarily need, is Zoom. It's called the Zoom H6. I'll show you. It's this, like, this is the latest one I think that they have. It's just like a mobile recording sort of thing to record your audio. It's fantastic quality, but it's not necessary, because actually we'll talk about this when we go to software, but like, we actually record everything through our laptops anyway. So that's for me, I think. Craigos, is there anything else that I might have skipped over?
No, 100%, Gareth. I think exactly those: laptop, mic, webcam, and you kind of have to decide, are you going to be mobile? I guess that does play a role. Like, if you're going to be doing mobile interviews, then it really does pay to have two separate mics, at least. If, say, you're going to interview one other person. So I'm going to sit down with one of you in a space, and then I've got my H6 or Zoom recording device. We can plug both of our mics in. I don't have to pass the mic back and forth, which is just an irritation. And also the sound is obviously not great. And then there's other little hardware things that you can sort of incorporate it as you go further. For example, there's little booths that you can put your microphone in that really makes, if you've got an echoey space, it really reduces echo. Echo is not something you can edit out of a podcast as yet. There's no software for that does that very well. So sometimes having a bit of, let's say, hardware to encase your mic in a sort of a soft environment reduces echo. That's the only other thing that I can really think of that may be beneficial, depending on the space that you're in and the kind of podcast that you're doing, if you're on the road or if you're just in a studio.
Yeah, actually, just other one thing which is obvious in a way, like, is earphones. So actually, get a pair of earphones, and I don't know, I think you kind of hear yourself speaking. Like, in the beginning, it's very, like, you're very aware of it, but like, it almost just becomes like second nature, and it just really helps with I don't know, just with the whole flow of the chat, being able to slightly hear your voice and what you're saying. And also just to kind of, it also, the main thing, I guess, is it helps with, not having two voices getting recorded at the same time, like, if depending on how you're recording it. So like, if their voice is coming through your microphone, your computer audio, like speakers, then that just really makes your editing super difficult. So that's why I'd say my earphones are really important as well.
Nice one. So it sounds like you can pretty much start with your phone to get cracking, and just make sure that your environment is sound and that the audio quality that's coming out is good. Because if you've got an audio format podcast, obviously it's pretty important that the quality of the audio coming through is like decent, so that the experience is good for the listener. So once you've captured the hardware and you've had this conversation, whether it's been captured on your laptop or directly onto your phone or using that H6 and two microphones, what are the next steps with regards to software, both in the recording process? Can you just flow with what you guys use and what some solutions might be for software? And just touch on like what the process is with regards to editing of audio and stuff like that, from the time you've recorded the conversation to getting that audio ready to be put onto the various platforms where people can actually consume it.
Cool, man. Should I roll with that one first again?
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah, look, I think there, just to follow on from what you were saying there a moment ago, Gareth, is if you're just using your phone, which is it just lowers that barrier to entry massively. And there's a software there called Anchor, which is a program that you can like record straight into your phone. You can like publish it straight away from there into all your platforms. You can have people call in and leave voice messages that you can add into your show. You can add in little jingles. It's a great piece of kit for just keeping things super simple from your phone, and you can have your podcast out just like that, you know. So then obviously the sky's the limit for these kinds of things. You know, you've got Adobe on the one end of the recording software. The stuff we use is to record our audio is called Audacity, which is software. It's free and it's open source software that is really great. It does the job. It says what it does on the tin, so to speak. And what we do is we just record it on our computers. So, for example, if Gareth and I are interviewing someone, he will record his audio on his side. I will record my audio separately, right? And then we'll get the guest to record their audio also separately, often just on their phone if they don't have a decent mic or anything like that. And what they do then is everyone sends their audio over to the person doing the editing. And then from there, you can add the 3 tracks into one editing software, which is Audacity in this case. And it's really straightforward. It's free. And it really does the trick. Once again, the sky's the limit. There's lots of other softwares. Then just briefly to touch on that, there are some other programs where you, especially if it's just one person interviewing another person and you're not necessarily using the video and Zoom and things like that, you can use a program called Zencastr. That's one of them. There's a few others that we can share with you. And what that does is it's a program that's web-based that records everyone's audio separately. As soon as you finished, it downloads all those tracks into one file, and you can get editing on them straight away. So there are sort of complete package softwares that do the recordings really well these days, and they do a great job for keeping it simple. So that would be sort of an intro into the audio side. Gareth, what would you add there, man?
Yeah, for sure. The only other thing I would add, like just in terms of also the audio, like what you record on your phone for like, it doesn't matter. For iPhone, you've got a thing called Voice Notes. For Android, they've got, I don't know what it is, but they've got their own version of audio recording.
Voice memos.
Voice memos. Yeah. So literally that's what it is on Apple. But then I don't know what it is on Android, and but literally that's how you record the audio. So that's the kind of software on the phones for that. Just in terms of other things that we use. So like, for example, now we're obviously recording this, we're doing a video as well, and we're using Zoom. We have the paid Zoom software because what it allows us to do is it allows us to record longer than 40 minutes, which I think if you've got the free Zoom software, you can only record up to 40 minutes. We also bought like an extra kind of package for Zoom for those people that are wanting to like market their podcasts in other ways, or they use Zoom for other things. You can connect to Facebook Live and YouTube Live and hold conferences and do presentations and these sort of things. And so like for a bit of extra cash, you can get the all-in-one package. And Gareth, you and I have spent hours discussing this over the last couple of years about which software to use for creating presentations and these sort of things, you know what I mean? And I eventually just settled on this because it just ticked a lot of boxes for us. But there are a lot of other recording things out there. But I think for podcasts and like what we do, Zoom is definitely a winner. Then what else we use is once this is recorded, right, we then have this software called Sonics. And Sonics is a transcription software. So basically what it does is I'll upload this whole video to Sonics, and literally in the press of a button, it depends on your Wi-Fi connection and everything like that, but like probably in about like 30 minutes or so, it will transcribe a full 2-hour podcast for us, literally word for word. you know, and it's just getting more and more and more accurate because it'll learn the sound of people's voices and how they speak and these sort of things. So we do that. And then what that allows us to do is it allows us to take segments from a chat, use it in blog posts, use it on social media for different things. I then also use that to, we always re-listen to our podcast before we edit them, both of us. And then it allows me to check when people said things and then create videos off the back of that, which we use as part of our marketing. And then also the good thing about having a transcription is you can post that transcription onto your website, and it's really good for SEO, right? As well. So that's really, really, really powerful. And a lot of people are starting to do it now. And yeah, so in terms of the video stuff, I have up until now been using iMovie because I mean, this is super simple stuff, creating just videos for that. But moving towards Adobe, what's the video one again? Premiere Pro, exactly. So just we're going to be moving towards that because we're going to be doing some other type of things for our podcasts in terms of not just podcasts, but we're going to be recording other things. So we're going to be wanting like a bit smarter and more sort of functionality from the video software. So we're going to be moving on to that. And then, the one key thing which, you know, Craig touched on Anchor, but then there's other platforms there that are basically podcast hosts. So like you have a web host for websites, you have podcast hosts, and we use a company called Libsyn. There's quite a lot of them out there now that are you know, just competitors, I guess, and in the industry. We use Libsyn just because I think we got a good deal through that John Lee Dumas course when we first did it. We got like a discount of however many dollars per month or a few free months sort of thing. So we've just stayed with them and we found them really awesome. And basically what a podcast host allows you to do is you just upload your audio there. You put in all the notes and everything that you write and stuff. You can connect up your different social media sort of accounts, and then you publish it, and it will send it to all the different podcast platforms like Apple Podcast, Google Podcast, Stitcher, iHeart, or Radio, all those sort of things. It will do that at a click of a button for you, and then it'll also give you stats and analytics and these sort of things, so you have an idea of, you know, how well you're doing, and you know what your, you know, what your viewership is, where they're listening, or how long they're listening for, these sort of things. So that was it. And then Craigos, maybe you just want to touch on, we also use another thing for our marketing, which is called Headliner, which is flipping a cool piece of software, isn't it? Yeah.
Anyway, we're back. The load shedding was shorter than we had planned. And we were just going to unpack the 7th step in getting a podcast going and what you need to do in order to get a podcast out into the world. And the 7th step is, how do you promote and market your podcast? And so the question that I want to put to you guys is, how do you actually go through the process of, once you've been through identifying your market, loading the content, recording a conversation with somebody, going through the process of editing it and getting it out into the world, how do you attract listeners to come to your audio experience that you've created and get them to actually listen?
It's a great question, Gareth. Look, the thing is, not everyone comes to the party with as much gravitas as people, you know, for example, people like Joe Rogan or Sam Harris, or these people, they've got a massive following before the day they ever started a podcast. So we have to understand that most of us are not coming to the party with that kind of pull or attraction. And so we have to really get it out there, as you said. And one of the first things we've sort of cottoned on to is using a software called Headliner. And we create little snippets of or teasers for our podcast with the content that we've created, and they call them audiograms. And it's basically just little snippets or teasers from the video and the audio. And it's quite a nifty little software because it creates these little packages where it's really, really nice to look at. It's engaging, and you can put all those little bits of information like your audio and your little caption and all that into one piece, and at the other end you get this nice little what is the word I'm looking for? You can just use that little piece as an asset in your marketing campaign. So we're using that quite a lot of the time, and it's quite handy because it's cheap. It's like I think it's about $100. I think it was, Gareth, for the year. And that's the pro version, and there is a free version that you can do quite a lot with. And there's quite a lot of templates and things like that you can use as well. The other thing was we actually got started with our own lists, our own friends and family on email. And maybe, Gareth, you want to just share how that sort of journey went in the very beginning.
Yeah, for sure. Look, in the beginning, I mean, you can't do what we did these days because there's all these new like GDPR laws and stuff, which I won't bore you with, but you have to go check them out for yourself. That's for sure. But I just took, or both of us just took all the email lists that we had, like on our personal emails that we had accumulated over time, and we just started using MailChimp, which is a free email platform. And we started sending out these weekly emails regarding, whenever we launch a new podcast, and we'd send like a nice little write-up, a few pictures, etc., to our email list. And we carry on doing that to this day. We also, in terms of marketing the podcast, Gareth, like, I guess, first of all, this is actually the biggest piece of the show, really. We do a lot of work beforehand, definitely, which we'll touch on just now, but getting your podcast out there, getting the word out there, trying to get people to listen, engage, etc., that's actually where a lot of the work is, the post editing. So we create a lot of videos and audios, like Craig said. We use Headliner. We also post on YouTube, we post on Facebook. We spend hours sort of writing the captions for it as well, because these days, apparently, when you use captions, it's more engaging, because people are watching things when they're in the office, so they can't listen. So you kind of, you write everything out for people. So it takes a long time to do these things, right? We're basically, you've got to sort of target your marketing towards the platform that you're using. So on Facebook, you will post a video of a certain type because it's more geared towards your Facebook audience. You need to find out who that audience is and on your, based on who follows your page and these sort of things. But then the person that's watching on LinkedIn is also slightly different, so, and then the content you post on LinkedIn is also different, so like we'll make it more around like careers and jobs and opportunity and these sort of things on LinkedIn, for example. So you need to be quite smart and quite savvy in terms of like, where you're posting things, and obviously what you're posting on those platforms. But it's definitely not something to be underestimated. Like I said, that's where a lot of the marketing actually comes from. And then also, don't like, what we try and do is we try and also get on together, like, so people see us like as a podcast team. We'll try and do Facebook Lives every now and then. We haven't done it for a while, mostly because I've been traveling. So we haven't really had that consistency, but like, we got into a good routine before that where we were promoting our podcast, just us talking about it live on Facebook and these sort of things. So look, there's so many ways you can do it, and there's, but it is essential. Do you know what I mean? Do use the platforms that are out there, use them smartly, how they're meant to be used, create the content around it. And you have to do that. You know what I mean? Like the podcasting world is, it's a difficult space these days to get traction. I read some numbers yesterday, Gareth, and it was like every 8 seconds a podcast is launched at the moment. Every 8 seconds. So it's something like, I think the number was 200 a day, which is like, it was 290,000. I can't remember the exact numbers, but it was just a lot of numbers, right? That were released like in the last year. So getting traction takes time and effort. You know what I mean? Don't get discouraged, because I think a lot of people do. But do put in a good effort to market it as much as you can, and sort of tailor it towards your audience and the platform you're using.
Nice one. Thanks, man. Yeah. So I think a lot of what you've spoken about there comes into doing that upfront work, so that you know exactly who your audience is, and that you've had the ability to be able to know why it is that you're doing what you're doing, and you've agreed the format, and you know those things, so that you can start to tailor the marketing. Because I guess the languaging that you use in your podcast needs to translate again into your marketing, and that thread that weaves all of it together is really important, so that someone who's following your particular show on a social platform is also then engaged in the content that's going to be relevant to them based on the work that you've been through in following these first 7 steps that we've been through. So I want to just quickly recap those 7 steps before we go, for anyone listening to this, and I'll ask you guys one last question before we shoot. And the first question was why are you starting this podcast, and making sure that you've got a clear why that aligns with something inside you that, you know, is something fun that you want to do, because a podcast is a lot of work. It's not just the 20 minutes that you hear or the hour-long podcast that you hear. There's a lot of work that goes into it. The second step was clearly defining your who, so identifying who it is that's going to be listening to them and what is it that they want to get out of the podcast. Next, the third step would be to agree on the format, which is, are you going to be doing an interview style, bringing experts on, or like you guys are doing, speaking to specific people in an interview style, or is it going to be a solo ramble based on some sort of information that you're carrying individually, or telling a story? The frequency was the fourth step, deciding how frequently you're going to put your podcast out, and then sticking to that frequency, knowing that you guys said, you know, with frequency comes additional work, more podcasts equal more work. And then getting the hardware, there was various different options that we unpacked there, and we're going to include in the show notes some of the actual kit that you guys are using, and the decision you need to make about whether you want your podcast to be mobile or whether you set up in an office like Craig's got set up there. And then you guys helped quite a lot with the software, set up in various stages. So the software was really this first part of being able to record the podcast using some software application. Then the editing software, you guys spent some time going through how you clean up the audio. Then there was the software related to distribution, which you guys use Libsyn, and that's the software that takes the polished audio and distributes it so that Gareth can open up Stitcher on his phone and actually find the Ridiculously Human podcast. And then some other applications that you spoke about were talking about how you use marketing software to drive people to get to the podcast in the first place. And then flowing into that, the 7th step is how do you actually market this podcast, and what are the channels that you're using to do that. So thank you so much for going through those steps. I think it's really useful. I'd like to just get one final question in, and that is like, let's say, for example, someone wants to do this podcast, not just for the love of their message, you know, maybe some sort of supporting a business or a specific product. How do people make money from podcasts? What's the model for making cash from a podcast?
Do you want to go there, Craig?
Yeah, man. Great question as well. It's certainly top 2 questions when you tell someone you've got a podcast is like, okay, how much money you make from it? And the reality is it's not that easy necessarily, as for all the reasons we mentioned above. You know, there are barriers to this, and I think one of the big things with making money is there's a few things. So first of all, if you have a product or offering, you need to, if you know what that product or offering is, it helps a lot, because then you can use your podcast in a specific way to market that. So that's certainly one way. Then also, once again, coming back to the niche, if you know exactly what the niche is that you're servicing, then there are marketers out there that are going to say, look, I know exactly who your audience is because you have a very specific niche in your podcast. And if you get enough downloads, then great, we will put in some adverts there. And that makes it a lot easier for them to be able to identify who they're marketing to if you know who your niche is. Then there's things like Patreon, where you can subscribe and you can pay per episode an X amount that you choose if you want to support your show that you really find value. And help them, support these podcasters, because this is an industry thing that is going to become more of an issue. You know, like how do we monetize this as a whole, not just as individuals? You know, and then there's obviously Amazon banners, which is, you know, when people click on the banner on your landing page or whatever it is, they can use that Amazon link to then purchase their Amazon products. And these are the most common ways that people are monetizing their podcast. And there's obviously a few others. Hey, Gareth?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think the only other one I would add to that, Craig, is there's now some podcasts, and these are generally the sort of bigger type of podcasts. So guys like, say, like Russell Brand, for example, they now have gone to a paid model. So there's I don't know the name of the exact platform, but there's a platform out there where you have to pay like a monthly subscription, and then you can listen to certain podcasts. You know, so it's almost like a Netflix sort of thing of podcasts. So there's quite a few ways, you know, like exactly the ones that Craig mentioned. I think the one thing I would like to just say around this, Gareth, because it is a great question, and like Craig said, it's the one that people ask a lot of time. I would just say, don't start a podcast if you want to make money. Like, that's not the reason you must start a podcast, you know, because most people don't make money from their podcasts. Start a podcast because it's something you're passionate about, and you want to provide value to your audience. And then off the back of that, then hopefully things will, you know, sort of monetize for you in some sort of way. So that would be my one sort of piece of just advice if you do want to start a podcast.
Yeah, I think the other one I'd like to just speak into is that this idea that somebody might have an existing potential product or some sort of retail outlet potentially, or something like that. So an example could be like Craig and I were talking earlier, like let's say, for example, you've got a pet food store or some pet accessories store, and you start a podcast which is relevant to pet owners, and you could monetize advertising space in there because the person consuming that audio experience is getting value from whatever it is that you're doing, interviewing stuff related to pets. But the real driver is to say, hey, if you want to get your pet food stuff, come to my online pets.com, whatever the gig is, which is really what you're saying. You haven't started the podcast specifically to make money, but it's driving an existing product of whatever sort that might be. It could be an online product, or it could be a physical location, or a retreat. It really could be anything, as long as you've clearly identified your market and you know who's listening to it. That could be another potential way to make some money from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
100%.
Sweet. So boys, thank you so much for coming on the show. I want to just give you one last question each, just to share what your recommendations might be for someone that's thinking about starting a podcast. Like, just what are some of the lessons that you've learned, without going over the stuff we've already been through, but just some experiences that you guys have had 2.5 years into creating a weekly show, and advice that you'd have for somebody else that's considering starting a podcast.
For sure, man. I think so. I'll just briefly from me, like if I think about our whole journey, like what has allowed us to keep on going, is adaptability, right? So being flexible in terms of like what your podcast is, just listening to, just being aware of kind of what's going on in the market, or just being aware of, you know, who your listeners are they changing, etc., and don't be scared to change, and don't be scared to change things up. You don't have to drastically change things, but just, you know, tweak things every now and then. You know, we have constantly tweaked things on our podcast because we're still trying to find that, you know, that real niche of who it is, you know, and then we're aware that this is a constant journey, and we will get there, but don't be afraid to change things up, for sure. So have that adaptability. And if you're going to run a thing with a friend of yours, you know, and you're doing it like we are doing it on other sides of the world, make sure that your communication is 100% open, honest, truthful. There's almost nothing more important than that, because if you're not like that, you will cause, like, you know, some sort of issues, grief, whatever it is, you know. And I think that's the one thing that for Craig and I, which we just seem to have worked out so well, you know. And it's never easy. It's always these are always the difficult things, is having the tough conversations, but you have to have those tough conversations, so that no one kind of like feels, I don't know, that there's not this sort of, I don't know, you just don't have fights or whatever it is, basically, you know what I mean? And we've been really, really good at that from the start. We basically said, look, let's just be 100% open and honest with each other, so that this thing works, and like how we're feeling, how it's going, if we want to make changes, etc. So, and just to tie that in with that is just make sure you're having fun. Seriously, like at the end of the day, that's what I think we should all be trying to do, is just having more fun. It doesn't matter what you're doing, if it's a podcast, in life, whatever, but you know, if you are doing a podcast, just make sure it's fun as well, you know what I mean? Because that just makes it so much easier. And that's what we found. So Craigos, I don't know if you got any other cool pieces of advice there, bud.
Yeah, man. I'm very grateful for what you're saying there, because it was very in line with what I was thinking anyway. And the fun piece is super important. And just remember, like, this is an opportunity for you to experiment and play as well. And when you are starting up your journey, factor the fun in, and let that be a little bit of a guide, because it's going to get you through the late nights or the early morning interviews and all these kinds of things. And the other thing I'd add, just a sort of a little bit differently, but just remember that this is your journey, you having fun, but it's actually about the listener. So just always consider them, be aware of their intelligence, be aware of their time, be aware of bringing value. And if you make it about them all the time, and you just relentless with that, and even the way you speak in your show and things like that, and be considerate all the time, and have self-awareness of how you're treating your people that take time out of their day to listen to you, the more you do of that, the quicker your show will grow and the more fun you'll have. So I think that would be the one little other piece that I'd probably add there.
Awesome, boys. I want to say thank you so much for taking time out of your busy schedules. I know Gareth's moving around a lot. It's getting close to 10:30 in the evening in Australia. Thank you so much for coming and sharing your journey, boys. It's been beautiful to witness your path over the last 2.5 years, and your show has grown. You've had some amazing guests on the show. Seth Godin's been on. You've had Bruce Lipton. I remember John DiMartini being on there, and you really have interviewed some amazing people, and continue to have amazing conversations about what makes us ridiculously human. Before I let you boys go, who wants to let our audience know where they can find the Ridiculously Human show to consume your content?
Cool, man. Yeah. So thanks, Gareth, firstly for allowing us on your show. It's flipping cool, man. And it's just been really awesome, seeing your journey as well, but like, it's really, you inspire people just through action. And I think this is really, really a cool thing to do, rather than preaching to people. Just through purely what you do, you inspire people, and you get them to kind of want to do the same thing. So congrats for everything you've done as well, and thanks for being part of this journey with us. Obviously, as guest number, I think it was 5 actually. So that was 6. Was it 6? Okay.
Morning. I was going to mention it, but I'm glad you brought it up. Thanks.
I was like 5. But that's cool, man. So yeah, thank you so much for that. And then in terms of getting hold of us, our website is www.ridic-human.com, and we are, from there you can actually find all of our Facebook, Instagrams, LinkedIn, and I'd say Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube is where all of our sort of stuff goes. So when we're more than happy to help people out in whatever way it is. If you've got any questions, please reach out, and we always kind of get back to you. So thanks again for your time, and thanks to your audience's time too, bud.
Cool. For those of you watching this, thank you so much for tuning in. If you are looking for additional content where myself and my business partner, Alex, are unpacking our personal journey of building our various online businesses, developing a personal brand, and getting clear on a marketing message, and then using content to support that to build an online business that teaches something and brings a skill that you have to the world, check out igniteyourbusiness.io. Thanks again to the boys for joining us, and we'll catch you next week on our next weekly Facebook Live. Till then, ciao.